Hey everyone. The trailer for the Minecraft movie came out last week, and the reception was mixed. So, what better time to look back on the world of video game movies and how they stack up against each other? Is Minecraft really so bad, or is it just kind of what we get with video game adaptations? For this list, I've stuck mostly with movies with English theatrical releases, with a sort of minimum budget requirement. Some franchises have been wrapped up in single items to look at their overall impact, rather than rate each movie individually. The tiers are pretty simple. S tier is going to hold the movies that I consider iconic, that I'd rewatch over and over again if given the opportunity. A tier are movies that I loved watching. They were great singular experiences, and I walked out of the theater happy that I saw them, or stood up from my couch because I streamed half of the movies on this list. B tier are entertaining, decent movies. They often have major faults though, perhaps creative liberty taken with the source material for the games they were adapting, or other general issues. C tier are movies that are just bad, that I can't really find any redeeming qualities for. The Super Mario Bros. Movie has become the quintessential video game movie at this point. It's proved to everyone that video game movies can be absolute box office smashes, and gave fans everything they wanted in a movie. There are only really two things that I can say that are negative about this movie. Number one is that it stars Chris Pratt. And number two, while a great first-time experience, it felt a little forgettable, and I'll probably never feel inspired to watch it again. This doesn't detract from it being a great movie though. I only ever really watch most movies once, and it's going straight into A. Until I started this list, I completely forgot that this movie had come out. When I first heard a Ratchet & Clank movie was being made, I was excited. Growing up, this was one of my favorite franchises, and I've played every game to date. The movie was a disaster, and it took everything that made the series lovable and threw it out the window, which is crazy, because the games were sort of in a seemingly easy place to adapt into a movie, take the story, and give it a larger animation budget. For me, this dumpster fire is the biggest disappointment on the list, so it'll be C for Ratchet & Clank. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Spirits Within was the first photorealistic animated movie, and it was also the most expensive animated movie in general for a very long time. I was a kid when this released, and a major Final Fantasy fan at the time. The only thing that would have been more exciting than a Final Fantasy movie was a new Final Fantasy game. While I can't say this movie blew me away, it was one of my first positive experiences with video game movies, and I think it told a solid story that can probably still be enjoyed today. Nothing spectacular, it didn't blow me away, which puts us into a solid B. I was never much of a fan of Final Fantasy VII. Or at least I wasn't compared to how much I enjoyed Final Fantasy VI, 9, or 10. But the idea of Cloud and Sephiroth in a movie was amazing. I can't actually find any evidence of a theatrical release for Advent Children, but I remember its release and the hype that surrounded it. It's hard for me to picture it not hitting theaters, but I can't confirm or deny that it was ever there. There were parts of Advent Children that were confusing, and as someone that hadn't actually finished the game before watching the movie, I felt that it actually helped clarify some things when I did get back to Final Fantasy VII later. It's a solid experience. I feel like you get exactly what you'd expect from a movie about Final Fantasy VII, B tier. When making the list of movies for this list, I didn't know that there had ever been a Double Dragon movie. I regularly had friends over to play Double Dragon on the NES, and trying to beat it was a whole thing we spent days or maybe even weeks doing. I watched this movie a few days before making this video, and I may be biased as a result, but I think this movie is probably a lot more entertaining today than it was when it was released. It has so much cheese that you'd expect from an early 90s movie, mixed with some actual decent action. It kind of also felt honest enough to the games. It starred Alyssa Milano and Robert Patrick with cameos from Vanna White and Andy Dick. I really don't know if Vanna White remembers her time in the Double Dragon movies. I'd love to find out. It was fun. I wouldn't recommend watching it, but I don't feel like I wasted my time with it either. Double Dragon goes into B. Then we have Street Fighter, Jean-Claude Van Damme. I don't really think this is a movie that had a lot going for it, and it feels like the definition of what a bad video game movie is. With that said, it seems like Street Fighter was popular enough at the time that the movie was able to net $100 million at the box office, which seems absolutely crazy to me. I hate it. I have nothing else to say about it. It's a C. The original Mortal Kombat felt a lot more in line with what I'd expect from the games than Street Fighter did. I wasn't allowed to play Mortal Kombat growing up, so I never had an attachment to the franchise. It's a solid, fun movie. Much like Double Dragon, it's filled with bad 90s special effects and cheesiness that makes some of the movie super fun to watch. The brutality that you'd expect is also there, references to the games are there, and it genuinely might have been the most honest adaptation of a video game that we'd get for a long time. Where Street Fighter failed, Mortal Kombat succeeded. B tier. After making an amazing Mortal Kombat movie in 1995, they decided to follow it up with what might be the worst piece of video game cinema ever created. Everything that made the original enjoyable and fun to watch was tossed, and I think this movie doesn't even deserve to be talked about. I wanted to create a lower tier than C for Mortal Kombat Annihilation specifically. I didn't do it, but I really wanted to. And finally, we have Mortal Kombat 2021. It's going to be the first entry on this list that sort of is an unnecessary reboot. The original movie released at the height of Mortal Kombat popularity, and piggybacked on the immense love of the franchise at the time. While Mortal Kombat is still iconic, I feel like what made it special in the 90s has dwindled, and we didn't really need a reboot that added nothing to the franchise. Is there action that's fun to watch? Sure. Is there any real reason to watch the movie? I don't think so. If you need Mortal Kombat in your life, the 1995 version is still better. Mortal Kombat 2021 goes into the C tier. Our first Mark Wahlberg movie on the list, and potentially my first contentious opinion. Max Payne was one of my favorite games growing up. It took everything that I loved about The Matrix and made it into a killer game that I went to internet cafes to go and play. The movie is not honest to the games, like, at all. But let's be honest, the story in the original Max Payne was only sort of there to drive the destruction you'd cause in the games. It wasn't deep and would have left very little to actually adapt into a film. With that said, it's an entertaining movie. I enjoyed watching it. I'm not going to say it's a cinematic masterpiece. I'd argue that it may not even be good, but it definitely isn't bad, and that's the key distinction between B and C, so it fits more in B than it does anywhere else for me. And we're back to great films. I feel like Detective Pikachu walked so that Sonic and Super Mario Bros. Could run. Unlike almost every other adaptation here, Pokemon has always had a wide variety of completely separate stories and plots. It isn't important that we nail a specific video game story, as it is that we get a movie that highlights the essence of the human and Pokemon world. Detective Pikachu does an amazing job of creating a world that blends these elements and creates a captivating enough story to keep me watching until the end. Detective Pikachu did everything right, and the amount it made definitely helped justify big budget video game movies, not just for the great movie itself, but also for the impact it had on the entire genre. Detective Pikachu goes into the A tier. Need for Speed is another movie that I completely forgot about. This felt like Aaron Paul's attempt to break into movies at the height of his Breaking Bad fame, and I'm not really sure what went wrong. The movie itself isn't bad, and it grossed way more than I would have ever expected it to, but it also just didn't do anything that made it memorable. It took a franchise that might not have really had a story. I'm not actually sure here. I've never played a Need for Speed game. In a world where we already have Fast and Furious, it's just hard to find room for Need for Speed. With that said, I still enjoyed it, so I have to put it in B, because there's also a lot of movies that are way worse. Wing Commander is a movie that somebody made, in case you didn't know. Somehow, I've actually seen this movie. I don't remember why, but I know that I have, and I don't think I knew what Wing Commander was at the time either. We've had some other 90s movies that were bad enough that they kind of became enjoyable, but there really aren't any redeeming qualities for the 1999 Wing Commander movie. Just avoid it, it's a solid C. And now we're at the movies that I haven't seen. Borderlands has become the new poster child for bad video game movies, and I will probably never watch it. But I had to mention it because it was an absolute mega flop. Dead or Alive is just a movie that I'm surprised exists. I'm even more surprised that it has a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes, which makes it 23% better than Borderlands. Monster Hunter, I feel like was done in by the pandemic, releasing at one of the worst times to release a movie. I've only ever heard positive things about this film, but I've never seen it, and I never really got into Monster Hunter either. Let's put this simply, I absolutely love the Uncharted movie, and I know that might be a hot take. Here's the thing, the movie does a decent job of representing the games, even if it's hard to picture Tom Holland as Nathan Drake. The action, the adventure, the story, it hits all the checks I want from an Uncharted movie. The only check it missed was being successful enough to warrant a sequel, because that's what I'm most disappointed about, the fact that we will probably never get a sequel. It's an A-tier movie for me, and I encourage everybody to go and watch it and enjoy it. And honestly, 41% for a video game movie, it's pretty high. The first Hitman movie was fine. It wasn't amazing, but I feel like it did enough with the source material to make it a decent adaptation that fans of the series would enjoy, so it goes into B. Then we got Hitman Agent 47, and it's a strong contender for the worst video game movie ever. I think Mortal Kombat Annihilation still takes the prize, but this is so close. Not only did we not need this movie, it's also just a complete and utter disaster. C for Agent 47. This is another one of those movies that feels like it just wasn't necessary, especially when you realize that the lore of Assassin's Creed probably lends itself well to film. The sci-fi mixed with beautiful period-based action. You might ask, how could that possibly go wrong? Watch the movie and you'll find out. C. Rampage was a game that didn't really have a story, and I feel like the movie was forced to take a lot of creative liberty with the license. You were basically just a bunch of monsters climbing up and destroying buildings and grabbing people out of their windows. It's basically like what you would imagine King Kong as a video game being. What we got was basically just an action movie with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and it does a decent enough job of being just that. I feel like you basically know what you're going to get when you watch a standalone Rock movie. I almost feel like this isn't actually a video game movie, but it still technically is, and that's why it's here. Because it's a solid action movie, it goes into B. I started playing Warcraft with Warcraft 2, and Warcraft 3 is a top 10 game for me in terms of hours that I've put in. World of Warcraft I played obsessively through the Burning Crusade. This came out when most active Warcraft fans were playing WoW, since we haven't had a non-WoW entry in the franchise for 2 decades. I feel like they took the original story, adapted it well, and turned it into a film that felt like Warcraft. There might be some bias here too. I went into this movie expecting it to be bad based on the reviews and opinions at the time. I came out confused, because nothing that I had heard resonated with me, and Warcraft is up there with Uncharted for movies that I just loved watching. When Prince of Persia came out, I was lucky enough to get invited to an advanced screening of the movie, so I saw it with all sorts of PR events going on, in an environment that made it an experience and not just a movie. This likely made me find the movie more enjoyable than I otherwise would have. With all of that said, it's a good movie. There's action, and I feel like we basically got a story that feels like it represents the games it was based on. Admittedly, I've only played the first 2 titles, and it's been a long enough time that I don't remember what the story was. But you can go back in time and stuff, and that happens in the movie too. If you're excited to hear me talk about Doom, I'm sorry to disappoint. It's just going straight into C. The original Silent Hill is interesting. I feel like it successfully captures the atmosphere and feel that you'd expect from a Silent Hill game, while also not being that entertaining. I'm putting this in B because I feel like it hits the places you'd want a Silent Hill movie to hit, but I'm just not personally a fan. Then we got Revelation, a movie that feels like it was made to jump on the 3D bandwagon that Avatar created at the time. This was a period of cinema that just saw a bunch of atrocious movies rushed out to capitalize on 3D hype, and it was trash. It's a C. Instead of looking at each Resident Evil movie, we're going to look at the franchise as a whole, because there were a lot of movies released over the span of a decade and a half. I feel like these movies were a cinematic experience that kept fans waiting for the next installment, over and over and over again. They proved that there was an audience for video game movies and sequels. The reality is that the Resident Evil series did something that may never be repeated with video game movies. And it kind of sucks that it's unlikely that we ever get to experience a video game universe like this ever again. Were all the movies objectively good? Absolutely not. But for its impact on the world of video game movies and its legacy, it gets an A. The original Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider movies are films that I've seen a lot, mostly because they were regularly on cable late night when there was nothing else to watch. And they did a great job filling that void. They lacked much substance, the action was okay, and I never played the actual games, so I couldn't tell if they were remotely faithful to the source material. But, because I've been able to watch them so many times, it's sort of an automatic B for me. Then we got the 2018 reboot, and that's another story. It may objectively be a better movie than the originals, but it feels like we didn't need it. And it really added nothing to the series that the originals hadn't already done. It also somehow grossed almost to the dollar the exact same amount of money as the original Tomb Raider, 17 years later. It goes into C because it isn't great and it wasn't necessary. Much like the trailer for Minecraft, Sonic received some absolutely negative feedback when the trailer dropped. Sonic didn't look like Sonic, and fans weren't happy. Surprisingly, the studio listened, delayed the movie, and redesigned Sonic, which created 2 movies that are just fantastic. They capture the essence of Sonic, and I'm pretty sure my nephew has watched them 50 plus times, so they definitely found their target audience. Interestingly, Sonic 2 is also the highest rated video game movie on this list, which I definitely think it deserves. It hasn't had the financial success that Mario did, which is basically the story of Sonic's life, but these are up there with the best of the best when it comes to video game movies. So, there aren't any S tier movies yet, a tier for iconic movies that I feel like I could rewatch over and over again. Well, here's a fun fact. I have potentially watched the original Super Mario Bros. Movie more than any other movie in my life. Was most of that when I was 6 or 7? Probably, but it still counts. This was also the first major video game movie, probably the first video game movie in general, but I didn't take the time to validate that claim. People were lined up around blocks to see this when it came out, for the first day at least, because it sort of flopped at the box office. But by nature of being first, I think we can also safely call it iconic. Is it also one of the strangest interpretations of the Mushroom Kingdom ever? Absolutely. But we also have to remember that at the time, there was very little Mario lore. For its place in cinema history and as my most watched movie ever, Super Mario Bros. Takes the S tier. And now we're at our last movie, Five Nights at Freddy's. I've never played Five Nights at Freddy's, and I feel like I might be a little bit too old to relate to most of the fandom on this one, but I decided to watch it as a horror movie that sort of was going to stand on its own for me. And it delivered a decent experience. Was the pacing weird? Sure. Did I miss a lot of references that were probably littered throughout? Definitely. Could I tell that the movie was faithful to a lot of the source material, despite having never played it? I feel like I could, and this is somewhat reflected in reviews I read at the time as well. I enjoyed it. I can't say it's my favorite movie ever, but as a non-FNAF fan, I still enjoyed it, and I'm sure fans probably enjoyed it more, so it gets a B. Video game movies have historically been panned by critics, and I sort of understand why. There's a strange balance that needs to be kept when creating movies based on games. You don't want to alienate the fans of the game who are probably going to watch your movie as long as it's faithful to the game. But then you have armies of critics who probably have never played the games and only judge the films without the context they probably need. I feel like we're moving in the right direction though. There are more video game movie adaptations in the works than there ever have been at any other point in time. Am I going to make an F tier for Minecraft when it comes out? Who knows? I hope not. But the reality is, we've seen the quality of video game movies improve over the years, and I feel like the sentiment in Hollywood is moving more in the direction of being faithful to source material instead of trying to adapt and appeal to non-fans as well. Let's forget Halo, it never happened. As always, that's just in my opinion. Let me know if I left your favorite movie off the list, or comment tell me what deserves to be S tier and why it's Super Mario Bros. See you next time.